There's a syrup that makes maple taste ordinary, smoky, caramelized, complex. A flavor profile that chefs describe as bacon-meeting butterscotch, a depth that maple syrup, for all its sweetness, cannot achieve. This syrup does not come from trees that grow only in cold climates. It does not require the narrow temperature window that maple demands. It does not need the freezing nights and warming days that limit maple production to a few weeks each spring. This syrup comes from a tree that grows across 38 American states. A tree so common that most Americans have one within walking distance of their home. A tree that shades parking lots, lines suburban streets, and dominates forests from Texas to Maine. This syrup does not require tapping, no drilling holes, no hanging buckets, no waiting for sap to drip slowly over weeks. This syrup requires bark. Toasted bark simmered in water with sugar. A process so simple that a child can complete it. A process so fast that you can begin after breakfast and pour syrup on your dinner. One afternoon of work produces syrup that sells for $60 per pint at specialty stores. One tree provides bark for dozens of batches without harm. One backyard contains the raw material for a lifetime supply of gourmet syrup. And 100 million of these trees stand ignored across America while we import maple syrup from Canada and pay premium prices for what we could make ourselves. The tree is hickory, the syrup is hickory syrup, and the maple industry spends $500 million per year making sure you never learn that a better alternative grows in your backyard. Today, we are opening the file on the syrup that outperforms maple. The 38-state tree that America forgot. The one-afternoon process that replaces the one-month maple season. And the industry that profits from your ignorance of what grows above your head. If this matters to you, subscribe and hit the bell. The file is open. In 2007, a forager named Travis Miller was walking through the woods of southern Indiana when he made a discovery that would challenge everything he believed about American syrup production. Miller was an experienced wild foods educator. He had tapped maple trees for years. He understood the process, the limitations, and the narrow window that maple production required. Then he found an old journal. The journal belonged to a settler family from the 1840s. It documented daily life on the Indiana frontier, including food preparation methods that had been forgotten for over a century. One entry described making syrup from hickory bark. Miller was skeptical. He had never heard of hickory syrup. No foraging guide he owned mentioned it. The very concept seemed impossible. But the journal was specific. It described the bark selection, the toasting process, the simmering time, and the final product. It described the flavor as superior to maple. Miller decided to experiment. He harvested bark from a shagbark hickory. He toasted it over a fire as described. He simmered it with sugar and water. What emerged from his pot changed his understanding of what American forests could provide. The syrup was dark amber, deeper than any maple grade. The aroma was complex: smoke, caramel, vanilla, and something almost meaty. The flavor was rich and multidimensional, hitting the tongue with sweetness first, then smoke, then a lingering depth that maple never achieved. Miller had rediscovered what American settlers had known and American commerce had erased. A syrup superior to maple, made from a tree more common than maple, through a process simpler than maple. He began teaching the method at foraging workshops. The response overwhelmed him. People who had assumed syrup required Vermont real estate discovered they could make gourmet syrup from their backyard trees. But the knowledge never reached mainstream awareness. The maple industry's marketing dominance ensured that hickory syrup remained a secret known only to those who actively sought alternatives. The flavor chemistry of hickory syrup explains why chefs prefer it to maple. Maple syrup's flavor comes primarily from sugar concentration. The sap contains 2 to 3% sugar. Boiling removes water until sugar concentration reaches 66%. The flavor is pleasant but simple. Sugar dominates. Hickory syrup's flavor comes from an entirely different process. When hickory bark is toasted, the heat triggers Maillard reactions between natural sugars and amino acids in the bark. These are the same reactions that create the flavor of grilled meat, toasted bread, and roasted coffee. Hundreds of flavor compounds form that do not exist in the raw material. The toasted bark then releases these compounds during simmering. Lignans contribute vanilla notes. Tannins contribute depth and structure. Smoke compounds from toasting contribute the bacon-like quality that distinguishes hickory from all other syrups. A 2018 analysis by researchers at Rutgers University compared volatile compounds in maple syrup versus hickory syrup. Maple syrup contained 23 distinct flavor compounds. Hickory syrup contained 67 distinct flavor compounds. The hickory syrup had nearly 3 times the chemical complexity of maple. This is not marketing, this is measurement. Chef Dan Barber of Blue Hill Restaurant in New York has featured hickory syrup on his tasting menus. He describes the flavor as what maple syrup wants to be when it grows up. He pays $60 per pint for artisanal hickory syrup, while maple syrup sells for $15 per pint. The price premium reflects scarcity created by ignorance. Hickory syrup is not expensive to produce. It is expensive because almost no one produces it. Hickory trees outnumber sugar maples in the United States by a factor of 3 to 1. The USDA Forest Service maintains the Forest Inventory and Analysis Database, the most comprehensive census of American trees. The data reveals the absurdity of America's syrup dependency. Sugar maple numbers approximately 35 million mature trees across its range. This range is limited to the northeastern states and the upper Midwest. Sugar maples require cold winters and specific soil conditions. Hickory species number over 100 million mature trees across their range. This range spans from Texas to Maine, from Florida to Minnesota. Hickories grow in 38 states, adapting to conditions from Gulf Coast humidity to Great Plains drought. 3 hickory trees for every maple tree, a range that covers most of the continental United States versus a range limited to the northern tier. And yet, Americans produce over 4 million gallons of maple syrup annually, while producing virtually no hickory syrup at all. The production disparity does not reflect tree availability. It reflects knowledge availability. Americans know about maple syrup because the maple industry has spent a century teaching them. Americans do not know about hickory syrup because no industry exists to spread the knowledge. The trees stand waiting. 100 million sources of gourmet syrup producing no syrup at all because the knowledge of how to use them has been allowed to disappear. Native Americans made hickory syrup for thousands of years before European contact. Archaeological evidence documents hickory processing at sites throughout the eastern woodlands. Burned hickory bark appears in fire pits dating back over 3,000 years. The Cherokee, Creek, Choctaw, and Chickasaw nations all documented hickory syrup production in their oral histories. The syrup sweetened foods, preserved meats, and provided calories during lean winter months. European settlers learned the technique from Native American neighbors. Colonial records from Virginia, Tennessee, and Kentucky all reference hickory syrup production. The 1840s journal that Travis Miller discovered was documenting a practice already old by that time. Then, commercial sugar became cheap. By 1900, refined cane sugar had become affordable for ordinary Americans. The economics of home production collapsed. Maple syrup survived this transition because it had already become a commercial product. Vermont and Quebec producers had established brands and distribution networks that positioned maple as a premium product. Hickory syrup had no commercial advocates. It remained a folk practice passed within families. When the families who remembered stopped making it, the knowledge nearly died with them. By 1950, hickory syrup had essentially vanished from American practice. A syrup made for 3,000 years disappeared within 2 generations of commercial sugar's availability. The maple syrup industry actively protects its market position. The Federation of Quebec. Maple syrup producers controls over 70% of the world's maple syrup supply. This cartel sets production quotas, controls prices, and manages a strategic reserve worth over $100 million. Quebec maintains a global strategic maple syrup reserve, stored in warehouses, managed like a commodity. This is not hyperbole. This is documented fact. The maple industry spends tens of millions annually on advertising and educational outreach that reinforces maple's position as the only real syrup. When Americans think of tree syrup, they think of maple. No other option enters consideration. The industry maintains this monopoly by controlling information rather than competing on quality. Maple industry publications never mention hickory syrup. Maple industry representatives, when asked about hickory, typically claim ignorance or dismissively categorize it as an inferior folk product. This dismissal contradicts the evidence. Professional tasters consistently rate high-quality hickory syrup as equal or superior to maple. The chemical analysis shows hickory is measurably more complex. But consumers cannot prefer what they do not know exists. The maple industry ensures they do not know. The strategy is information suppression through omission. Never mention the competition. Fund maple education. Let alternatives disappear through neglect. The production process for hickory syrup inverts everything difficult about maple syrup. Maple production requires tapping during the narrow window when temperatures fluctuate between freezing nights and thawing days. You wait as sap drips slowly over weeks. Then you boil 40 gallons of sap to produce 1 gallon of syrup. The fuel costs are significant. The equipment costs thousands. Hickory syrup requires none of this. You do not tap the tree. You harvest bark from branches or trunk sections where bark is naturally loosening. You do not wait for a specific season. Hickory bark can be harvested year-round. The complete process takes approximately 4 hours from bark to bottle. Begin with bark selection. Shagbark hickory produces the best syrup, recognizable by its distinctive bark that peels away in long, curving strips. Harvest bark from branches or from trunk sections where bark is naturally separating. A handful of bark pieces provides enough material for 1 pint of syrup. Toast the bark before simmering. Place bark pieces on a baking sheet in a 350-day grill-round oven for 15 to 20 minutes, or toast over an open fire until fragrant and slightly darkened. This step triggers the Maillard reactions that create hickory syrup's distinctive flavor. Combine toasted bark with water in a pot. Use approximately 4 cups of water per handful of bark. Bring to a boil, then reduce to a simmer. Simmer for 60 to 90 minutes until the water is darkened significantly and the hickory flavor is pronounced. Strain the liquid through cheesecloth. Add sugar at approximately 1 cup per cup of hickory water. Return to the pot. Simmer over medium-low heat until the mixture reaches syrup consistency, typically 30 to 45 minutes. Bottle the hot syrup in sterilized jars. The syrup is shelf-stable for up to 1 year. Total time, 4 hours. Total cost, approximately $1. Total yield, 1 to 2 pints. Compare this to maple, 40 hours of sap collection, 8 hours of boiling, specialized equipment, narrow seasonal window. The comparison is not close. The economics of hickory syrup production defy conventional food cost calculations. The raw material is free. Hickory bark has no market value. It falls from trees constantly. The market value of hickory syrup ranges from $30 to $60 per pint at specialty retailers. $1 of inputs produces $40 to $60 of retail value. A single afternoon produces 2 to 4 pints. At $40 per pint, this represents $80 to $160 of value from 4 hours of work. A single weekend each month generates $400 to $600 of retail value. This exceeds part-time minimum wage earnings while requiring no commute, no boss, and no schedule. The limiting factor is not production capacity. The limiting factor is market awareness. Most potential customers do not know hickory syrup exists. Those who learn about it become eager buyers. The culinary applications of hickory syrup exceed those of maple. Maple syrup is sweet. This limits its applications to pancakes and desserts. Hickory syrup is complex. The smoke and umami notes allow it to bridge sweet and savory applications. Glaze hickory syrup on pork, bacon, or ham. The smoke notes harmonize with smoke in the meat. Add it to barbecue sauce. Drizzle on roasted vegetables. Use in cocktails where the complexity adds dimension that simple syrups cannot provide. Simply pour hickory syrup on pancakes. The improvement over maple is immediately apparent. The additional flavor dimensions transform ordinary breakfast into something memorable. 67 flavor compounds find more applications than 23. Hickory provides more than syrup from the same trees. The nuts contain over 650 calories per 100 grams, exceeding walnuts and approaching macadamia nuts. A single tree produces 20 to 50 pounds of nuts annually. The shells produce the classic hickory barbecue smoke flavor. The wood is prized for tool handles, requiring strength and shock resistance that other woods cannot match. A single hickory tree provides syrup, nuts, smoking material, and potentially lumber over a lifetime that can exceed 300 years. And over 100 million of these trees grow across America, providing nothing because the knowledge of their value has been lost. The choice between maple and hickory reflects larger choices about how we live. Maple syrup comes from far away. It is produced by industrial operations. It travels thousands of miles to reach most American consumers. It represents dependency on supply chains you do not control. Hickory syrup can come from your backyard. It can be produced by you this weekend with no special equipment. It represents independence from supply chains that profit from your dependency. The maple industry wants you to buy. They have spent a century teaching you that syrup comes from stores, that production is specialized, that you are a consumer rather than a producer. The hickory trees want nothing. They grow regardless. They drop bark whether you use it or not. They offer their value to anyone with knowledge to accept it. 100 million hickory trees across America. Enough for every family that wants independence. Enough for every person who has ever wished they could make their own food instead of buying it. The trees have been waiting since before Europeans arrived on this continent. They waited while Native Americans made syrup. They waited while settlers made syrup. They waited while the knowledge was lost. They waited while the maple industry taught you that syrup requires Vermont and Quebec. They are waiting now, outside your window, down your street. In the forests you hike through without seeing, the knowledge was buried but not destroyed. Everything required for syrup independence stands ready. One afternoon, a handful of bark, 4 hours of simple work, then syrup, better than maple, from trees you own, from knowledge they hoped you would never find. The maple industry spent $500 million making sure you knew maple and nothing else. This video cost you nothing and taught you what they paid to hide. 100 million trees, 38 states, a syrup superior to the one you have been buying. All of it waiting for you to begin. If this video helped you see what grows above your head, subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss what we uncover next.